Thank you all for coming this evening. My name is Penny Wright. I know many of you, but we have new faces in the audience. And if you live outside of our library district and are currently getting our newsletter, take a newsletter. There are copies on the desk over here. And we have samples of several other programs that we're offering coming up soon on the table as well. We'd like to have you for everything. Our Martin Luther King breakfast, unfortunately, is booked up, but we have a waiting list. So one of these years, try to come because it's a great program. It's free, big breakfast, and singing. It's a really super program. Anyway, Happy New Year to everyone. Is that the proper thing to say to an astrologer? Well, anyway, we're happy that Kate is here. She's been here quite a few times, and we always learn something. And now we're all curious about what the year has in store for us. As many of you know, Kate has been involved in the study of astrology since about 1969, actually, after she went for a consultation with a local astrologer in Brooklyn Heights. And she's self-taught, and she's also had the privilege of studying with some of the most notable astrologers in the field. She is certified by a national organization. She writes for an astrological magazine, has a blog, teaches annually, and sees clients in her Sag Harbor home. It's a real pleasure to have her with us. Please welcome Kate Plum.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you, Penny Yvette, and all of you from the Southampton Rogers Memorial Library, and all of you all for coming. Really appreciate your attendance. Nice to see you all. Yes, we're going to get right into the year, but I just wanted to see if I can record this time. Sorry, so just excuse me for 1 minute. Opening marks. I wanted to start the presentation with the understanding that today is Epiphany. And as I heard yesterday, I go to St. Anne's, I sing in a choir in St. Anne's in Bridgehampton, and the new pastor talked about Epiphany and with the three kings. We call them three kings. They weren't actually kings, they were magi, they were astrologers. And he actually used the term, magi actually means astrologer. The kings that nomenclature was put on later, in the Christian church. But they had read the Hebrew script, the text, the old Hebrew text. And they knew that there was a Savior coming. And they traveled thousands of miles, probably with a lot more entourage than is shown here, because they would be traveling at night and there were bandits about. And so, but they noticed that there was an unusual star in the sky. And it really led them to take this journey from safe homelands, probably Baghdad, in Persia, our present-day Iraq, which is really the cradle of civilization over there. We are very much indebted in many ways to those ancients who developed not only astrology, but of course a lot of our cultural background comes from there. And so they came from Persia, and they traveled because they saw this unusual star. Now, what exactly the star was, who it was, is up to guessing. There are some people point to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which occurs every 20 years in Pisces, and that would be something. It wouldn't account. It was never this kind of big star, of course. This is apocryphal. But it is interesting to note that the birth of Jesus maybe was around the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which is one of the events that we're going to have in December of 2020. So it's a looking at the stars, looking at the planets in the sky. And in those days, that was the messengers. That's how people knew what the gods wanted, by looking at the stars. And it hasn't lost its significance today. That's what astrologers do all the time, interpreting what's going on in the earth with looking up in the sky and seeing where the planets are. But it's something to note that, so here's the Epiphany. The Feast of the Epiphany today is when theoretically the three kings, the three magi, the three astrologers came and found the baby Jesus. So what's so important about 2020? I'm going to show you some images about 2020 and some coping mechanisms at the end. And one of the questions I had about this year was, why does our life seem so chaotic these days? I don't think there's anybody that, maybe there is, would argue with that, but I do pretty sure that we're all pretty clear about that things are quite chaotic, more so than usual. So I'm interested here in giving you a context for 2020 to help you understand why things are so chaotic. Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen in 2020 or any other time because we are creating it as we speak, as we are here. We are players. We are still here. You know, haven't gone someplace else or up to heaven or whatever, but we are here and we are players and we're co-creating what's going to happen to us. But there's a context, and this is an extraordinary year in many, many ways. Okay. So we're going to put 2020 in context so that you can see these there are three big planetary conjunctions. That means the two planets are coming together. You know, we have a new moon, the sun and the moon come together. We never actually see that in the sky because the sun, no matter where it is, would blot out the moon. But it always indicates once a month that this is a new beginning and a new start. And we have three major planetary conjunctions occurring in 2020. And it means that we are at the end of cycles, a lot of cycles. And when things are coming to an end, it's called the balsamic moon phase, when the cycle that would begin here is coming to an end. And so that's one of the perceptions, I think, that it helps us to understand that we are in this dark despair time when it seems like there are only problems and no solutions. Because we haven't reached, and because we do have these three planetary conjunctions, conjunction coming together, two planets coming together means, oh, we're starting another cycle. So until we get to those points that the three new conjunctions, the new beginnings, the two planets come together and they start another orbiting around the sun, because all of these planets we're talking about orbit around the sun, we are in this very dark time. And contrary to appearances, some people think this is the beginning of something, but it's really not. And so that's what one of the thoughts I would like to leave you with, is that it appears really dismal on some fronts, but it actually is the dark right before the dawn. So one of the major, not only those three conjunctions that were going to occur in 2020, but this is a major transition that we're all part of. The transition takes hundreds of years. And I will show you that here, the vernal equinox, the spring equinox, where that, the Earth is revolving around the sun, and where that vernal equinox is against the background of the stars, slightly shifts 72 degrees every year. And these would be years here. In minus 4,000, minus 3,000, 2,001 here. Each point, the vernal equinox is against the backdrop of a different star in a different constellation, although it stays in one constellation where that occurs for 2,000 years. So we have the Taurus here, and the stars, the vernal equinox appearing in front of the stars in Taurus, indicate those 2,000 years were the age of Taurus. And then you move on to the age of Aries. Here's the Aries zodiacal sign, and the stars in Aries are strong. And then in Christ's time, we began pretty much, I mean, these are very, nobody actually knows. No one asks a person, no one actually knows when this occurs. But the Pisces, the age of Pisces is here, and the stars of Pisces. You can see we're leaving that with the very end. And the next zodiacal sign over here is Aquarius. So the vernal equinox is moving, it actually goes backwards in the zodiac. But there's been much research done on the affairs of the earth in these specific time periods. And if you're interested in understanding the history, these are big histories, the 2,000 years, 2,000 years, 2,000 years, 2,000 years, and then the Aquarius age will also be from 2,000 years. But what the events that occur on Earth related to those signs that were strong for the whole planet. You know, this is not just here in the United States. But if you're interested in understanding more, there's a wonderful Jungian astrologer, Alice Howell. She's deceased now, but she did wonderful research on the astrological signs. Anyway, so so I wanted to talk about this transition from the age of Pisces and understand. I think that you learn astrology from many different viewpoints, in many different ways, and understanding the signs. We're all made of all 12 signs. Some people have some signs stronger than others, but we all are configured. We all the 12 signs are really part of each and every one of us. So. But the understanding of the Pisces, the difference in the Piscean age, we understand when you see that's a fish. Those are the two fish, and they're swimming in opposite directions. And the fish swim in a school. If you watch fish, and you've been in the Caribbean or something and see a whole school of fish, and everybody dives together and everybody comes together. They're completely involved with their environment. They take their cues from the environment. If there's a shark up there, they go the other direction, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a water sign, Pisces, and it's an emotional sign. It's a spiritual sign. It's a sign that really we're looking for some kind of truth. And and they're cold-blooded. Now, the fish. But as we're moving to the age of Aquarius, that is, and here I have the picture of the age of the water carrier. He's a water carrier. It's an air sign. So right away we're moving from Pisces, which is a water sign, emotional, feeling level. Everybody's moving together. You know, you either have one faith, everybody had to believe the same thing, whatever faith you were affiliated with. But Aquarius is the only zodiacal sign there's a human person. And this is a water carrier. It's an air sign. He might be carrying water, but it's emblematic of carrying something, of pouring something into the environment. And what are you giving out? It can be literally water, but it can also be energy. It can be your words. How are you influencing your environment? It's very different from the energy of Pisces, which takes their cues from the environment. So when we're moving into the Aquarian age, and these ages take hundreds of years to actually actualize, but we are in this transition. We are all on this unconscious, running through our unconscious, this transition from Pisces. And we can all see already the Aquarian ideals being manifesting in the world. Because Aquarius is about androgyny. It's about being friends with someone. If you have someone who's an Aquarian, they're not emotionally connected to you so much as you want to be your friend. And so we can see now the prominence of impersonal relationships and androgynous relationships. I mean, think of the Supreme Court all of a sudden, make it legal for gay people to marry. I mean, that happened all of a sudden. It was brewing for a long time, but then that's one of the big. To me, when the culture, and if you know astrology, that's why it's so fun to know astrology, because you read the newspaper and you can actually hear and read what's happening in the culture, and you have some kind of reflexive point about it. Oh, that's a symbol of the Aquarius. All of these impersonal relationships, androgynous, gender-neutral relationships. Aquarius is neither male nor female, it's both, it's androgynous. And you see these children, these young people, 12 years old, and they want to change their sexes. They want to have purple hair. You know, it's this, we're getting manifestations of these changes in our lives all the time. So Aquarius is also very much about social idealism. It's about liberty, equality, fraternity. It's about brotherhood of man. Everybody gets treated equally. You know, we're in this very disparate and economic inequality now, which is completely not Aquarian at all. And that's why there's been such a demand for more democracy, more people's voices being heard, more economic inequality. And this is what the Aquarian age promises. Also, the civilization's expanding and reforming itself through technology, through inventions. These new ideas that are coming in to clean the oceans and all of this, all of these amazing things, the hemp and the mushroom houses and all of this that we're working on in terms of sustainability for the earth principles. All of the inventions are really part of Aquarius. And they bring a dedication to the ideals of democracy, equality, and human freedom. Now, this country was founded on men who had a lot of Aquarius in their natal birth charts. So for them, of course, all men are created equal was a limited number of men. But the ideas were very much au courant in terms of the Aquarian age ideals. We have not, in this country, we haven't quite lived up to them yet, but we're working on it. So that's one of the background. Now I'm going to talk about the 3 planetary conjunctions that are occurring in 2020, but I'm talking now about the 3 background issues that are happening, that are some part creating such this kind of discord that we're going through. And the second one I'm going to talk about here is this Uranus-Pluto conjunction. Anybody born 65, 66 had these 2 planets in conjunction. They were together. And in my generation, you know, we went through 65s and 66. And those were very turbulent years, the Vietnam War, but there were also major social programs that LBJ, you know, he's the first one that comes to my mind, but the immigration changed, the Medicare came in, you had the women's movement pill, you had the health care, I'm skipping a big one, civil rights, the big civil rights, yes. Huge movement in terms of equality, in terms of making things better for more people. And so during the time period that we're still recovering from, you have is that time period between 2012 and 2000, this whole time period, and we had these Uranus and Pluto, they were in conjunction, they were together here at 65, and now they've moved into 90-degree orb, and we are still recovering from that. But so all the upheaval, all of the 2010, 2012, the Tunisian fruit seller who started the whole revolution in 2012 and went to Egypt, and then you had Europe explode, and then we had the Occupy Wall Street in the fall of that year. All of that is the birthing of some awakening to a different level of consciousness for a lot of people. And so we're still recovering from that. And this is a third cycle that we're still in the effects of, and we talked about this, I don't know if I talked about it here, but we did in Sag Harbor about the effects of the August 21st, 2017. This is the shadow of the eclipse. Now, it doesn't always happen across the United States, and it happened August 21st, and some people went and heard and saw it all across this path. This is the first time that the shadow of eclipses had fallen on continental United States since 1918. So it was 100 years before that we had issues. And it was interesting, if you go back into the history of 1918, one of the things, you know, it was we had just, you know, the First World War was, you know, we were only in it for a little while, the First World War, because most of the people in this country did not want war, and they actually prevented President Wilson from actually going to war. But it ended the isolationist mindset, really, in this country, that we actually went over and helped fight World War I, and we were, you know, invaluable to save Europe. So from the Germans. And we also interned Germans over here. We treated people that we were at war with very, very poorly. There was also, which is interesting to note, that there was a bubonic, well, it was it's called an influenza epidemic that was prevalent all over the world. In fact, 500 million people died all over the world from this, the epidemic of this influenza. And there is some feeling that it might have started in Fort Riley, Kansas, because of the beginning of the mobilization of all the troops to go to Europe. They were in army hospitals, and they had no, and it was kept a secret. You know, in those days in this country, if there was some outbreak of some disease, you were not told about it because there was that, you know, that paternalistic attitude, and that's probably still going on today, obviously. But in terms of that, what was going on here in the United States. And so if we can see what's happening now, we have these crises with the vaping and the opioids. So there's kind of, I mean, not to put a downer, but it's just marking when the shadow of an eclipse falls on a certain part of the world, and it doesn't always fall in the United States. Okay, that's my major point here. There means that something's going on in the United States. Something is happening. There's identity crisis. There's going to be crises of all kinds. And if you remember, there was a huge hurricane down here in 2017. And we have all the fracking problems in the middle of the country, and then the fires in that summer where we began to notice all those fires up there. And they're continuing. So we're in the 2024 is another eclipse, which means we are in this eclipse time band, which means significant changes are occurring in the United States. Identity crises, crises. So those three backgrounds, nothing to do with 2020, except that they are background noise for all of us to have to integrate without actually knowing what it is we're integrating. So those three that we just talked about. Okay, so backwards. Uh-oh. Doesn't seem to go backwards. How do we cope? Yeah, here we go, good. So what will 2020 bring, and how can we cope? So this is, I wanted to just show, and I might have showed this before in other times, but this is not an actual picture of what the solar system looks like, okay? It's just a computer imagination. This happened to be the picture. I couldn't find anything for this time, so I'm using this. Fall equinox 2012. But you can see, and just to get you some kind of orientation, when I say Pluto and Jupiter are going to be in Capricorn, so that you get some kind of understanding of what exactly that is. So if we look here, here we're on the Earth, and the Moon is revolving around the Earth. And from our perspective, if we know that the Sun and all the planets are actually moving around the Sun, but from our perspective, this would have been September 21st, 2012, but that doesn't. The Sun appears to be in front of 0 degrees Libra. That begins the fall season, and so from our appearances, that appears. So we have to use that for all of the other planets. At this point in the fall equinox 2012, Mars was in Scorpio. Now these are your zodiacal signs. Your Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sag, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces. That order never changes. That's probably the only thing that ever changes. I mean, that order never changes. So Uranus in Aries will next go to Taurus, then will next go to Gemini, and then Cancer. And the same is true for all of these planets. They're orbiting this way most of the time. And you can see in 2008, Pluto, the planet, started in entering the sign of Capricorn. That was, Capricorn is where all of the intensity of the time is located now. That's the sign that's getting most hits, shall we say. But we're going to be talking about Pluto being in Capricorn, and we're also going to be talking about Jupiter from 2012. It has moved all through these signs, and it is now resting in Capricorn. And we're going to speak about Saturn, which is also left where it was here in 2012 and has moved up into Capricorn. So there's Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn, and we're going to be talking about those in the nesting, bundling up in one sign, which is unusual. I'm going to give you examples. The last time that happened was in the 1200s, when they are bundled in one sign. So this gives you kind of a primer, but please remember that it doesn't, it's not to scale. So the first conjunction that we're going to be dealing with, January 12th, it happens only once between 33 and 38 years, and that's the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. That would be what I'm talking about up here, when Saturn is moved up now. You're not going to, Pluto, first of all, you can't see Pluto. It's not seen with the naked eye, so we're never going to see it. But it's not like they're on top of one another. This is huge distances in outer space. But according to our viewpoint on Earth, we look up there and we see Saturn in Pluto, and then Jupiter also coming up into Capricorn as bundling in one sign. So Saturn, what does Saturn signify? We're going to get this conjunction of these two big planets. This is a depiction of Saturn as Father Time. And we all have Saturn, the planet Saturn, in one of those 12 signs in our charts. And that is symbolized, and some of it have it stronger or strongly connected. Some of us have it less strong. Some of us have it able to. Some people with a strong Saturn, their patience, responsibility, contraction, limits, security, boundaries, are very strong. And you can the defining and bindings. When you have a strong Saturn, you're building walls around you, and you are defining yourself. Now that can be good and bad. Defining yourself. It's also Saturn rules your bones, and so being on your bones now, understanding the strength of your bones, that carries your structure, and Saturn rules all that. So this is many different levels. Planets work on many different levels. It's physical, mental, spiritual, different levels of our lives. But you know it when you're having Saturn coming around. Time's up. You can no longer procrastinate, something that you must do. And with Pluto there, it makes it even more important. Pluto is the planet that symbolizes elemental power. This is the picture of Pluto pulling up Persephone and taking her down into the underworld. So with Pluto, these are transformations of powerful. He wanted Persephone, and Demeter didn't want to give up her daughter, and they were responsible for the spring flowers and the earth becoming green, and so they eventually made a deal. But with Hades, who gave Persephone back to Demeter, so we had 6 months of greens. This is a Greek mythology. You learn a lot about astrology by studying Greek mythology. So, but when Pluto comes around and you have a Pluto transit, there's probably some level of a life and death crisis in your life. It could be a health crisis. It could be someone passing away. It's a big transformation. And things don't go back to the way they were, which is what, there's, when you have Pluto. See, I'm talking more generally about what's going on, but your own little lives also have these transits. I don't know enough about any of your charts to know exactly where your Capricorn, the department of life that's ruled by Capricorn, because that's where most of especially if you are Capricorn, you'll be feeling this too. But that's where most of the intense energies are being felt these days. So I'm going to go back and look and see when Saturn and Pluto were together before, and one of the times was a very significant time in the Catholic Church time period. They came together in Capricorn in the same time in 1518, and Martin Luther had just put up his 95 Theses for the Wittenberg Cathedral in Wittenberg. He was a very devout monk, and he just could not stand to see what was happening to the poor people who were being sold indulgences, that they would get to heaven if they gave the priests some money to build a new St. Peter's Cathedral. And it was one of the 95 things he really, and he sweated a long time and was really very disturbed by what was going on. But he started, as we know, the Protestant Reformation. So all of the Protestant denominations came on after him because they were all trying to clean up the abuses of the Catholic Church. And then there was a counter-Reformation where the Catholic Church tried to decide, okay, we better clean up our act a little bit. But this one man in the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn completely changed the whole cultural milieu in Europe. It also started, many wars, of course, started, because no one wants to give up power. Capricorn is you have a stanchion, you have a throne or a viewpoint, and you don't want to give up that power. When Pluto, Saturn and Pluto come around, there's a transfer of power. Because mainly with a Capricorn, because Capricorn rules are social, political, and economic institutions. So that's why, in many ways, Luther was so instrumental. He's really the beginning of, there's a wonderful new biography about him too, Martin Luther. He was really the beginning of the modern man because his conscience, he actually did something that his conscience told him he had to do. It was just eating him up, that he could no longer stand what was happening. And, because before this time, everybody just did what the church said. And, vicious, and everybody, okay, we're going to give this money even though we can't feed the children. I mean, but his own individuality sprang forth. And he was very interesting, and he got married after that, and he educated girls. He was a really reformer. He was really felt education was very important. He did many things that were unheard of previously. What else happened with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 1518? Actually, when the Portuguese began bringing slaves over here. So they did it first, and then, so we have the beginning, we have the end of the power shifts with Luther, and the power of the Catholic Church was unstable. And then we also have the beginning of the abhorrent and dehumanizing slavery issues. Now, it's interesting to me that if the Saturn-Pluto conjunction we're having now in Capricorn, there is talk about reparations for slavery. Actually it's coming into the conversation now, which is very interesting to me. Because what happened when Saturn and Pluto were there and began something, the next time those two planets come together, those issues came up again. Like we saw in 1965, all those social reforms that happened, the civil rights movement, the voting rights and all that, came up again, and the healthcare came up again when the two planets come together. That's a significant understanding in astrology that, cycles repeat because we're all going around the sun. This, I think, is one of the interesting pieces of that we can take as a hope in the future. This was a Saturn-Pluto conjunction that occurred. It was not in a Capricorn, it was in Aquarius from March to December of 1786. And this was, the founding fathers met to revitalize after the revolution. It was such a disaster, the way the revolution, Washington never had enough people or men, or the states were supposed to send him troops and send him clothes, and the states didn't cooperate at all. It was a mess. Organization was a mess during the revolution. And so they all got together, we got to change the Articles of Confederation and make it something different. Well, they met originally in the summer of 1786, but the Saturn-Pluto conjunction didn't finalize until December of 1786. They tried to meet in 1786, but they didn't have a quorum. They couldn't get enough delegates from each of the states together. So they waited until the summer of 1787, and they all sat in a room in Philadelphia with one of the hottest summers of the century, and with the windows and doors closed, and hammered out the United States Constitution. Even though it wasn't their mandate to do it, they were supposed to just change the articles. But they decided to throw out the articles. And and so they sweated it out and created this new constitution. And to me, because it's in Aquarius, and that's the social contract, it's a sign of equality and brotherhood. So the novel idea of forming a different kind of governing authority based on manifested after the conjunction occurred in Aquarius. Now, we're not going to get a conjunction of Saturn and Pluto in Aquarius we're going to get one in Capricorn, and we're going to skip to Pisces, and that's probably out of all of our lifetimes. Because here's the little picture. We had Saturn-Pluto conjunctions right here in 1915, in August 1947, in 82, and here's January 12th in 2020. And the next one is here, June to February 2053. Well, maybe some of us will definitely be alive. That's only 30 more years. But, anyway, that's, They occur in different signs, just like I showed you the map. Saturn, Pluto's not always in Capricorn. Saturn's not always in Capricorn, but they are to these days. So Saturn-Pluto conjunctions symbolize both destruction and resurrection in new forms. Power shifts. In your life, something shrinks, something disappears, and something has to be built up again. Something dies and something gets reborn. So in your own particular life, what needs to change and move to a different level? We're all being, actually, there'll be some kind of compulsion to change, to do something differently. It's something that frightens or repels or overwhelms you. That's kind of a symbol. You're having a Saturn-Pluto thing. Oh my God, I've got to do this. I'm being asked for this, to go through this experience. What in your life will be released, restructured, and rebuilt. And the area of your life where this is all occurring is going to be different from each one of us in the room, because that's your Capricorn house. So the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Cancer was in 1914, and this was the complete refinement of all the boundaries in the countries of Europe. And there was also enormous, I'm going back so that you can actually see what happened before when Saturn-Pluto was conjunct, to see what we can expect comes going forward. So we can expect the alteration of boundaries of countries. We can expect that, as we saw in Downton Abbey, the changeover from the Edwardian England into the war situation when Downton Abbey became a hospital, and the women's roles changed. Women suddenly had to go to work, even the aristocratic women, and that rigid class structure completely fell apart. So, and then there was also the dissolution of the Russian monarchy, the Ottoman and the Austrian-Hungarian dynasties were gone forever. The role of women also changed. So here's just a picture to confirm that, because I like to see, there's proof of that. This is Europe in 1914. You see this huge Russian Empire. You see Austro-Hungarian Empire. You see the German Empire. You see the Ottoman Empire down here, going over here. And then after World War, you see Germany shrunk, Russia shrunk. We've got now up here in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, Czechoslovakia. The Austrian and Hungarian Empire was broken up into all these other tribes, Yugoslavia, and Turkey has become a country rather than the Ottoman Empire. So again, the Saturn-Pluto were together in August 1947 at 13 of 3 of Leo, and again we have countries being born. Israel and Palestine were born, the same month, May 1948. That's why they have so many problems, because there's so many alike. And India and Pakistan. The British came in and ran that boundary line. No British person actually went up there and saw what was happening to them. They just went up there and decided, okay, you're going to be India and you're going to be Pakistan. You're going to be Muslim and you're going to be Hindu. There's still problems up there now in Kashmir. Today, we see these problems. India doesn't want to recognize Kashmir now. Anyway, baby boomer began. We also have the British Empire, which had over 50 countries under their control before World War II. That completely broke up. Churchill said very famously, well, I didn't want to be, oversee the breakup of the English Empire, but actually he was. And the American Empire was born after the war, because we went in there and rescued Europe from fascism. And it's interesting that as soon as the fascists, the German fascists were brought to heel, then the communists, suddenly we had to have another enemy, and the communists, Stalin, became our enemy. Oh, very interesting. But here's Europe in 1939, and you have Germany contained here, and you still have these Latvia and Poland and these little countries. But then in here, at 48, you have Germany no longer exists. We just carved up Germany, and the British part, the British, Soviet part, the U.S. its own. We don't, these things just happen. So The next Saturn-Pluto conjunction I want to talk about is November 1982. And this was another trend change. Among the things I'm going to talk about, the second thing, but here is the beginning of the Federalist Society, which is initially a very small group of lawyers in colleges, and they didn't like the American trend that we were getting so liberal. And it was the conservative lawyers, and they started this Federalist Society, and it was all about reading the Constitution as the original writers interpreted it. It was a very strict interpretation of the Constitution. So this was founded in 1982, and it still is strong today because all of lot of these judges that are being appointed to the Supreme Court and the appellate court, the other courts, are from the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society is grown because they want to keep the status quo. There's other, they want to keep the Second Amendment, the very strict interpretation of, and it's why one of the reasons that the conservative, the philosophy of the conservative movement is so strong these days. The other piece was Ronald Reagan, and he was also in that 1982, around that 82, there was a big recession in 82. The inflation slowed, consumers increased, stock market grew. But the deficit grew. If you think about the debt, and we're still under, this is Saturn Pluto now, in 1980, the debt was $909 billion, and in 1990, the 10 years during which Reagan was 8 years as president, went to 3.2 trillion. It's vastly more than that now, 30 years later. So, but this began in, Reagan had this economic theory that if you look at this is an outrageous corporate tax rate from 70 to 28%, making corporations richer. When Eisenhower was president, the taxes were up 90%. The corporations paid 90% in taxes in Eisenhower's time. People paid many more taxes than we pay now. And what happened is this trickle-down economic theory was proposed by an economist, Milton Friedman, and he said, well, this trickle-down will work if, this was all trickle-down, corporations get tax breaks and the workers and the businesses and production will, more spending, more increases. Well, it's only supposed to work if you actually give everybody, the workers, a minimum wage. If you actually make sure that the bottom, that they're protected to a certain level, then the trickle-down can happen. But the Reaganomics, the government at the time decided they were going to ignore that proposal of what they took Friedman's other proposal about this trickle-down economy, but they did not take this other protection for the working class. And you can see here what happened to the top 1%. This is just in 2007, what's happened to the bottom because of this trickle-down economics. And it obviously doesn't work now, but we're at the end of Saturn-Pluto conjunction. We're imminently going to start another one. And to me, that would say that the reality and that this system does not work, that we have to change our economic policies. This is just a funny thing I found on the internet. Trickle-down economics, or as I like to call it, Reaganomics, it only works for the rich. It's the way it's intended. Not working for you because you're not rich. Not intended to help you. I think I gave the rich the largest tax cut in American history. We still have a president today who's doing the same thing. Just blindsided to the history. So these are some of the next Saturn-Pluto conjunction is January 12th, and these are some of the current events that I found to be just on the top of my head. You could spend the whole rest of the talk, you all bringing up things that you can see that have this kind of momentous, dire horror in some cases. The Notre Dame fire is right on the top of the list. That was last April. And certainly because Saturn rules structures, it can rule buildings, and Pluto is destruction of buildings. And to have a sacred space like that burned down and have to, it's really a really major symbol in my mind in terms of what's going to be occurring here. And although that's what has to happen, because we need a new a perspective, a new mindset of how to organize society in this country. So we can see the student unrest in Hong Kong all over the world because of the human rights. We're demanding our human rights. But the corporations, they're getting stronger, but they're also just very beginning to be held accountable. You think about Obama in 2008, yes, he saved the big, the economy, but nobody had any accountability for the destruction of Lehman Brothers and all the people that lost their homes. If you have a question, can you hold it? Yeah, I would appreciate that. Thank you. The big pharma, the opioid crisis, the Sackler family is getting sued. Of course, they're sending all their money to Switzerland, and it's just getting really tiring. But you see all these worldwide demonstrations by the millennials on climate change, and also all over the world, the governments are out of touch with the people. So the second major conjunction for 2020 was this Jupiter-Pluto, and it has going to have 3 passes: April 5th, June 30th, and November 12th. If you happen to be born on many of those days, you're going to have a very powerful year, or within those 3 days around there time period. They're going to have a very, and I'll show you, the next slide is one of my favorite heroes. I mean, I know he's loved and hated, but he's a very interesting fellow, Napoleon. This is Anne Grace's portrait of Emperor Napoleon. He's a Jupiter-Pluto person. He is successful, and there's an enormous power to him, and he aggregated, and he totally transformed Europe. But one thing that people don't often understand, and this is a quote from his biographer, Andrew Roberts: "The ideas that underpin our modern world, meritocracy, equality before the law, property rights, religious toleration, modern secular education, sound finances, and so on, were championed, consolidated, codified, and geographically extended by Napoleon." That's because he invaded all these countries in Europe. But to them, he added a rational and efficient local administration. It was chaos before Napoleon came around with all the first they had the kings, they beheaded all the kings in France, and then it was all chaos for many years before he came around. An end to rural banditry, the encouragement of science and the arts, the abolition of feudalism, and the greatest codification of laws since the fall of the Roman Empire. So we need a whole new set of laws. Jupiter rules laws, it rules your faith, transforming our belief system, which is what should be part of 2020. Your own personal belief system, the rules, the laws that you live by. It's going to be up for renegotiation. What's the meaning of your life? How are you living your life? And are you living your life according to the values and the belief systems that you have? I'm not going to go into too much. Jupiter-Pluto were last in Capricorn, Jupiter-Pluto in the 1520s and the 1771. It was about exploration, and now we're. So the last time Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto were in Capricorn altogether, that's what we're having this year, was 1284 to 1285. That's what makes these times, this is 800 years ago. That's why it's so interesting. And most of these events that I found from Wikipedia, first is the Pied Piper of Hamelin, who, whether that was apocryphal or not, we don't know, but it's there that the townspeople wouldn't pay him for what he did to get rid of the rats, and he had this little tune, and he put his little bin in, and all the children, he made all the children leave. He took all the children away. I mean, we were kind of under that kind of delusion these days, really, if you think about it. But anyway, these events that happened then, and that's how we look at astrology. We look at events for how they happened during that time. Most of these are changing of power. There's an West African slave. He was a royal slave. He was freed, and he usurped the throne. There's a change in power. All these things. This cardinal also, he reduced the authority of the count as cardinal of the church, and this is before 1518, of course. So the church they were between the feudal lords and the church's authority. They were always battling. A change in power there. There was a change in power at Edward I in England because he defined the jurisdiction of church and state. That's an interesting concept. The definition, the boundaries switching. Boundaries can be literal, like we saw with Saturn and Pluto, in countries, but it can also be in terms of the laws, in terms of what you can do and what you can't do. So he demanded that the church courts confine themselves to ecclesiastical issues. And this was also about inheritance laws were redefined. So laws need to be So this is just a question. Might we see someone arise in 2020 who can help us live a vision of a better world for all and to be in a position to initiate the structural changes necessary? Structural changes are necessary in this country. Big time. Big time government changes are necessary. We need someone who's going to be at the helm that's going to be able to do that. And that's what we should all be thinking. I mean, not just keep politics the same old way. Not just being funded by the big farm companies and the gas and the subsidies and the big corporations. We need someone who can actually switch that around. Now the third major, and this is the last major conjunction for 2020, is this wonderful, interesting Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And this is a wonderful astrologer. He's no longer with us, but he's written very great research on the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. This will occur at 0 degrees of Aquarius. Here comes Aquarius again. Here comes Aquarius, December 21st, 2020. And this is a grand conjunction because this is the symbol of what this is 7 orbits of Jupiter and Saturn. All the planets make these kind of beautiful mandala as they pattern themselves around the sun. And it's called a grand conjunction because it commences a 200-year shift in our social, political, economic, cultural, spiritual, educational, and philosophical life. So I'm going to go into this a little bit more. You all can bear with me. We're going to go over an hour, I'm afraid. Skip this one. I'll skip as much as I can. Jupiter and Saturn have been meeting in Earth signs since 1802. Jupiter, Saturn, Earth signs, 200 years, Earth signs, since the Industrial Revolution. We've been using the resources of the Earth up. We've been manufacturing, we've been tearing down forests, we've been fishing, we've been using them, we've been manufacturing, making, it's ending. This is just a question I have, whether the destruction of all of the Earth's resources now is partly because we're at the end of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions occurring in Earth signs meaning you're manipulating the Earth, you're doing for the Earth. So by the end of 2020, you would be prepared to have a career and place in society that aligns with your beliefs. Jupiter is your beliefs and Saturn is the structure of your life. So wherever you have, especially where you have the Aquarius in your natal chart, Department of Life, there's going to be a brand new beginning for you that you can no longer deny. So last time they were in air, which is what we're going towards, in 1980 to 2000, the ideas make you wealthy. Internet was born in 1983. You had the computer technology, the conservative movement, we talked about that. Church of England allowed women to be priests. This conjunction was in Libra, and it's similar to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Libra. But it's interesting to note because this is the foreshadowing of the Aquarius coming up. The High Middle Ages is the last time that we had the conjunction in air signs, 800 years ago. And this was the Sixth Crusade during that time period where we used diplomacy instead of fighting the Crusades. You know, we went over there many times to try to subdue the Arabs. This is not anything new. We've been doing this for hundreds of years. But this conjunction in air signs in 1288 began a 10-year truce of hostilities between Christians and Arabs. Obviously, that's not going to be tomorrow, but it's something we have to imagine happening. It's really up to us to imagine it happening, to pray for it happening, to live in the outcome that we want. Also in the 1200s was when Jupiter and Saturn were last in air signs was the monasticism, the orders, they were living all together, they had some groups, and then you had some of these friars actually were out there in the world being missionaries and selling or whatever, they weren't selling, but they were actually demanding their ideas be met. So it was this was also Thomas Aquinas during this time period. You know, he really brought Aristotle's philosophy to Christianity, and so we can kind of look forward to this. Florence, this birthplace of the Italian Renaissance, was also when Jupiter and Saturn were in air signs, which is what we're going to be experiencing for the next 200 years. And we're only beginning to see that 2020 is about that. So there again, we're at the end of the element of the earth and moving into air. This is also, to me, this is the University of Cambridge and Oxford. There were many universities that were born during this time, and this to me is like a real picture of the internet. But this is in the Middle Ages. The monks all talking to each other, you know, they had the old text. They could translate all these old texts, and it really revitalized all of Europe. The ideas. That's the one thing we have to remember about the Aquarians, is about ideas. Ideas dictate what the actions you're going to be taking. So we can say that the spreading of ideas, the new intellectual renaissance is going to come. The ideas are gold. It's no longer the money you have in your bank that's important. You have your ideas make you money. What's your new idea? These new inventions that are coming down the pike that we see happening now already. Modern day crusades, these journeys, like Greta Thunberg's coming across here in a boat this is a modern crusade. The use of diplomacy now. Hopefully we can get a president who will be more diplomatic and doesn't see war as inevitable. So these popular revolts, you know, before Martin Luther, nobody really revolted very much, but afterwards there were a lot of revolts, peasant revolts. Okay, next, we're coming to the end now. I'm going to go over a little bit. I'm sorry, Penny.
Oh, it's okay.
The future of the collective depends on the consciousness of the individual, because Aquarian is a humanitarian sign. It's about the uniqueness of the individual. And this is partly the spiritual sense, the chakras of the centers. We're actually spiritual beings having the physical, in some philosophies, a physical experience. We have to connect with that, you know, and feel it. So most important understanding by 2020 and beyond. The persons born with these planets I've been talking about, Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn, in some relationship, and it's a lot of people, are all going to be involved in turning over and making these cultural, dynamic, structural changes to society that we are on the precipice of. And it's a lot of people, and that's what makes it so interesting, because Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn can be in your charts. Each of you has a natal chart, and whether Jupiter, Pluto, or Saturn are connected in the natal chart in any way, you are going to experience all these conjunctions, these new beginnings. Okay, I've got to do something different. My destiny is important to me, and I have a unique destiny. So this to me is very important. It's not just going to affect, and that's why it makes 2020, one of the reasons that 2020 is so important, because of these new conjunctions, because of this new birthing of something individually, and therefore when the individual gets it, the collective will get it. That's why it's so important that we all do what we are supposed to be doing, that we know inside. This is one of the other pieces that I think is very important. It gives me a lot of hope. This was an astrologer. This is not from me. This is astrologer John Townley, and his Astro Cocktail is his website. You should really look on there because he's done a lot of research. There, in general, and I'll show you the picture, in Saturn here, this is January 12, 2020. Saturn rules the establishment and the status quo. And as of January 12, 2020, that's next week, Saturn, when the conjoining Pluto, we've been talking about that on January 12th, Saturn, the status quo, will stay in nesting between Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And these planets, which we do not see, which we all have in our charts, but they dictate the outer big social changes that have to happen. He speaks about it very eloquently, that Uranus said, these are folks, the Saturn is the status quo. I'm going to keep this the way it is. And when Saturn's out of that bundle, when Saturn's way over here, the government is way out of touch with these larger social trends that need to happen. So as of then, until July 1st, 2032, when Saturn meets Uranus and it goes out of the bundle again, we can expect to have a government that's more in touch with what's going on in the greater cultural cohesion, encouraging. The final slide, which is where we've been, towards the nesting, is when until finally gets in tune with a bigger historical picture, it is later seen in hindsight as a period of disastrous myopia in the face of what should have been clear and present danger. And that's actually what we've been living through, especially when you think about the climate crisis. That we've been, okay, we're not, you know, nothing's happening in there, I don't know what to do, or there's a myopia. But and if you go to his website and look at his Astro Cocktail, he delineates these other time periods when the government was responsible to the larger social trends. It doesn't happen all the time, but we're in this time, next 12 years when it's going to happen. Hopefully, in this past year, you picked up some in the nodes in the Cancer, the North node in Cancer, which we might have talked about when we gave this talk last year. That taking care of your family, feeding each other, nurturing each other has been where the growth has come this year, and will remain for the first half of 2020. Then the dependence on the government, which has proven to be so untrustworthy, has lessened. We can't depend on them. We can't trust what's going on in the government. And so what we can trust, what we're doing with our family and our friends, and that we're nurturing and supporting them and protecting them. Now, as of 2020, this is not going to be an easy year. This is not the toughest time of this year, January, believe it or not. We are in eclipse time. We had eclipse in Capricorn on the 26th of December, a solar eclipse. Eclipses always are very unstable. You don't know if it's going to go. It can be very powerful for you. You can suddenly rise to a prominence during an eclipse if you have it. Would be in 4 degrees of Capricorn. And then we have the full moon coming up on the 10th. There's a lunar eclipse. Eclipse time periods are always the most volatile because things happen suddenly. Suddenly something was there that wasn't there, something is there, it wasn't there, now there in our own lives, and that's the most probably, if you have an eclipse going in your chart, life changes, and you can make a note of it. You'll notice it when you have an eclipse affecting your chart. So there's another eclipse time period during June 21st, and at 0 degrees of Cancer. It's a same eclipse that in the same place that occurred in June of 2001, which is, kind of a little ominous. We're also going to have Venus and Mars retrograde in this time period. Venus goes first in August, and then Mars is a little bit later. So that means your departments of life, there'll be 4 departments of life in your individual chart that are going to be, you're going to have to rethink the values. What do I want? How am I getting about what I want? So that time period is going to be difficult. And then particularly because Mars is going to be in Aries in the fall, and it's going to be hitting those Capricorn planets. That's probably the most, from June on, is probably the most difficult time, and that's when we're going to get the election. So also the USA solar return for the birthday of the US is on a full moon lunar eclipse. So not to leave you with any dread, what can we do? And this is Gandalf said to Pippin, all we have to do to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. That's all we can do. You're here, you're living here now, you are, that means you have a part to play, you have a contribution to make. And on a physical level, this is what I like to recommend, because Saturn rules bones. It's very important to get to the dentist, it's very important to walk, it's very important to feel, because Saturn is the structure of your life, and it's important to actually feel that your structure, you have a solid structure, that your bones are in good shape. You go to a dermatologist, your skin, Saturn rules the skin, what you're expelling out, are you sweating enough, you're scrubbing, these, you might think they're trite, but actually they're not on a physical level. It's very important for you, because the finer, the more attuned you make your own body and mind and spirit, the easier it's going to be to navigate what's coming in the outside world, because you can't exactly trust it. There's not going to be a sense of security in the outside world. The security has to come from you. So therefore, your physicality is very important to keep your health very strong. Eat well, sleep enough. And declutter and redistribute storage areas, basements. Clean out Saturn and Pluto. You got a Saturn-Pluto transit, you clean out the basement. You get rid of all the stuff you don't need. It's very psychologically important for all of us to do. And consolidate your debt. Very important not to be overextend yourself. Make sure that you're, because the trillions and trillions of dollars that the United States is in a debt, it's not sustainable. And so it's important that because you come to an astrology session, you know that debt is not, excessive debt is not healthy for anybody. On a mental level, I've been reading Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy because this was written after World War I, and he was a Capricorn. He's a very, he was born with a Pluto-Neptune conjunction in Gemini in 1892. A lot of very beautiful people were born in that time period, 1890s, the turn of the century. They are visionaries because this Saturn-Neptune conjunction is a seed conjunction. It only happens every 500 years, this Pluto-Neptune conjunction. And they seed the whole spiritual evolution of humanity. And Lord of the Rings has that all in it. The journey, have a daily meditation and a breath awareness practice. You absolutely have to keep calm inside because the outside world is not going to make you calm. You get, you know, you can get fearful and we have a opportunity this month. Saturn rules fear, and Pluto's transformation your fear. So turn this insecurity that you feel on the outside world into security inside your own physical body and your own garden, as Candide said. Spiritual level, listen to what other people are saying. I think we're missing that whole piece of actually listening to people. And listen to music, do whatever you can to reduce stress. Become a person who can live in two worlds, spiritual and the material. Learn to live in solutions, not the problem. Learn to live in solutions. Learn to live in the outcome that you want. See the outcome that you want. This is ideas. This is what's so important in the Aquarian age. Actually see. You want a man in your life or a woman in your life? Actually see that person. You know, this is what the Aquarian age is all about. It's about ideas. And as Plato said, ideas create a reality. You know, Steiner's, I use this prayer, and with this prayer, as my daily meditation, and if you'll allow me to say this with, you know, for you. Rudolf Steiner was one of these seers that actually could see the future. We must eradicate from the soul all fear and terror of what comes towards us out of the future. We must acquire serenity in all feelings and sensations about the future. We must look forward with absolute equanimity to everything that may come. And we must think that only that whatever comes is given to us by a world directed full of wisdom. It is part of what we must learn in this age, namely to live out of pure trust, without any security in existence, trust in the ever-present help of the spiritual world. Truly nothing else will do if our courage is not to fail us, and let us seek the awakening from within ourselves every morning and every evening. And my final slide is, if that doesn't appeal to you, then maybe this quote from Mikhail Gorbachev, who really, June of 1990, he really wanted Russia to work closely with the United States. He was really a visionary. New world order for a new type of progress throughout the world to become a reality. Everyone must change. Tolerance is the alpha and the vega of the new world order. Tolerance is all about Aquarian ideals. We tolerate everybody's differences. We learn to live with each other, with a different religion, different hair color. You know, we all have to do it. Anyway, I appreciate very much you all coming.
Thank you so much.